Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back here with you for this workshop, even if only virtually. Wish I could be there in person. I know it's been a very difficult year in Pakistan, and I have thought of you all often and certainly wished you all the very best in these difficult times. I want to talk to you today about a project that we've just finished up in West Africa, in which we've been looking at how can we do a better job of delivering energy projects that deliver social and economic impact. And this has been funded by the UK government under a program called Energy and Economic Growth. And the basic challenge that the Energy and Economic Growth program put together is that there's sort of this broad contradiction in the research on energy and economic growth. On the one hand, very well-known relationship between energy consumption here on the x-axis and social and economic well-being, the HDI, Human Well-Being Index on the vertical axis, and extremely well-known relationship plotted many different ways, often against GDP, that shows that as energy consumption per capita goes up in countries, human and economic well-being goes up, gross national product goes up, et cetera. On the other hand, when we go to the very poorest parts of the world and we do randomized control experiments in which we introduce in which we introduce new energy projects into places that have historically not had electricity. And then we follow out the impacts of those investments over time. What we often see is very little impact. In this particular study that was published a couple of years ago, on the left-hand side, you see 3 countries on the top and 3 countries on the bottom that are middle-income countries, and you see that when you add new electricity projects in those places, you get substantial human outcomes benefits from those. But on the other hand, in this particular study on the right-hand side, in very low-income communities, when we add electricity projects to those communities, you often find not only minimal impact, but sometimes even negative impact from those projects. So the question is, in a sense, what's going on here? Why is it that, especially in the lowest income areas of countries, we often find relatively little or even negative impact from new energy investments in those places? Sort of counter to our idea that when we bring electricity to places, it should help modernize them, it should help bring them into the economy, and so therefore we should see social and economic benefit flowing from those projects, but we don't. So why doesn't this happen, and what can we do differently about it? So our hypothesis going into this research was that in order to understand this, we had to move away from the supply side, right? You can bring energy in, but the question is, how are people actually using that energy? What are they doing with the energy that is then enabling them to take advantage of it? And so we focused this research on the user side of electricity. And what we have built over the last several years, and some of you will have seen this idea before, is a research program around what we call the net social value of energy, which is just the difference on the one hand between the benefits that one is able to derive from using energy as an energy user on the one hand, and the burdens and the costs and the risks to you as a user that flow from that energy use. The most obvious of which is you have to pay for the energy, but there may be many other different dimensions to the downsides of energy use as well. And so what is that balance? And is that balance on par positive or negative? You can kind of think about this as an equation, right? The social value of energy is the economic benefits that we derive from energy use. The non-economic benefits that we derive from energy use minus the costs of energy, minus any additional risks or burdens that are derived from energy. Of course, many of these things are difficult to compute, to calculate, to measure, and so it doesn't always work out neatly as an equation, but I'm going to show you one way that we've done it computationally as part of this study, and maybe hopefully inspire others to pick this up and do an even better job. So if the net social value of energy is positive, that is to say you're getting more benefits as an energy user than it costs you to use the energy, then we would expect social and economic development to occur. If the net social value of energy is negative, on the other hand, then we would not expect significant social and economic development to occur in that community. So this is sort of our hypothesis going in. And what we did was go to Sierra Leone in West Africa, and we measured the social value of energy and the factors that impacted it in 4 communities there, the capital city of Freetown, 2 other large cities, Bo and Kenema, and a small town in the rural areas with a microgrid called Seguema. We did this using surveys of households and businesses and focus groups in areas where the energy was being used publicly, 2020 and 2021, complicated, as you can imagine, by COVID. And we interviewed a total of 619 households, 170 businesses, and 53 focus groups. So here's the net results of what we got. And so I want you to sort of have a good sense of what you're looking at here. And then I'm going to show you some different parts of this graph in the next one. So on the axis, the horizontal axis, what we have is what we call the use gap. This is the degree of unmet electricity demand compared to desired levels of reliable electricity use. So we went in and we asked people, how far are you in your existing energy use from where you'd really like to be, from the level of energy use that you'd like to have reliably delivered to your house. And so that's the x-axis, and the 0 point is up here in the upper right-hand quadrant of this. And so people who are to the left of the vertical axis are folks who are experiencing a negative use gap, meaning that their use is not where they would like it to be among all of these households. And this is measured by their willingness to pay for additional energy use. So we asked them, if you had more additional reliable energy service going to your household, how much additional would you be willing to pay for that service? And so you can see the yellow dotted line here is a measure of where their willingness to pay for additional service is equal to their current bill, right? So at -1, anyone on that line is saying they would be willing to pay as much as they are currently paying again if they could get more reliable electricity delivered to them. So on the vertical axis, the y-axis, what we have is what we call the affordability gap. So this is the intensity of the cost burden on the household compared to what they would consider an affordable cost for the household. So we measured for each household what they considered an affordable level of energy cost, electricity cost, how much they could afford to pay on a monthly basis. And then we compared that to their current bill. Again, how much they are currently paying. And again, a negative number indicates that they are currently paying more than they consider to be affordable for their household. And so the dashed blue line here is where that affordable bill is 1/3 of their current bill. So that's at a value of -2. So below that is where their affordable bill is is less than 1/3 of their current bill. And so those above that line have a current bill that's less than 3 times, if you will, what they consider affordable, right? So they're approaching affordability, sort of. Right. So that's what you're looking at here. And of course, what you see is that the households, there's a lot of households that tend to be along the x-axis, meaning their bills are relatively affordable for them, and they have relatively high willingness to pay for additional service. And then you have a lot of households along the vertical axis. These are folks for whom their current bill is deeply unaffordable, and they don't have a lot of desire for additional electricity because they can't afford it. So we're going to go into that in more detail here in a minute. But what I want you to see just generally is that for the large majority of households, right, the net social value here in terms of affordability and use gap is negative. Right. So either they're not getting the full value out of the energy that they would like to get out of the energy because it's not being delivered to them reliably. They can't get enough energy to create enough value, or they can't afford the energy that they're paying for, right? They have a fairly high negative affordability gap, or both. Right. So for the vast majority of households, you have a net social value of energy on at least one of these 2 characteristics, and perhaps both of these characteristics. So why is the net social value of energy negative for many households in Sierra Leone? Well, we dug into this in detail in our data collection and data analysis, and there's a number of reasons. So the first reason is that energy expenses are really high. So if you consider that in a European or a North American context, the average energy burden, meaning the fraction of a household's either income or monthly expenses that they spend on energy, the average is roughly 3%. And we consider something like 8% or 10% to be a definition of a very high energy burden. What we see is that in Freetown, the average energy burden is between 9 and 21% for households. That's the average, right? So 3 to 7 times as high an average energy burden as you would expect in a European country or in North America. And in the other 3 cities that we looked at, Bo and Kenema and Seguema, that burden is even higher. Right. And in the microgrid context, right, it's 25 to 58% that they're paying for electricity of their monthly expenses. And we used expenses because income is a very difficult proposition to measure in extremely low income communities, and monthly expenses are a much more reliable understanding of kind of household financial activities. Right. So we see extremely high electricity costs. Second, as a result, in part of that, but also in part of because of unreliability of electricity supply, and because the electricity supply has voltage and frequency fluctuations that in turn cause damage to electrical appliances. Electrical appliances are not available. All of that adds up to household electricity consumption is being curtailed, sometimes quite substantially. And so if we look at household electricity use in average households, and so here we're looking at a category. I'll explain a little bit more in a minute what this means, but the basic appliance category, which is lights, iron and ceiling fan, and we asked how much ordinarily might one expect these devices to be used over the course of a day, and what would the total kilowatt hour consumption therefore be, right? We would simulate an electricity demand from this basic appliance set of approximately 6.3 kilowatt hours per day. And what we actually find are average household electricity demands of about 3.8 kilowatt hours, right? So people are underutilizing the basic appliances that they have available to them, again, for a variety of reasons. Sometimes there's no electricity, sometimes they can't afford the electricity, sometimes the appliance is broken and not being able to be used, which is a further cost, of course, on the household. And if you look also, by the way, in comparison to the subsidized level of monthly kilowatt hours at which you get a reduced rate from the electricity company, most households are well above that subsidized level. So we're not providing enough low-cost electricity in order to meet basic electricity demands in these households. So here are the appliance categories, and this is the other reason that people have a net social value of energy that's negative, and that is they have limited access to what we would call value-creating appliances. That is, most households in Sierra Leone are in a situation where their appliance set is a very basic set of appliances, or maybe what we call a basic plus set of appliances. Here you can see this middle one, in which you have a very limited array of household technologies. And what you don't have are the kinds of additional technologies that can be used, for example, to create home-based businesses, which could create revenue, for example, et cetera. And I would just remind you that the difference between a household sector and a business sector in very low-income communities, and certainly in Sierra Leone, is there's no differentiation, right? People do not have businesses in shops where they go to do their work. Almost all businesses are in what's called the informal sector, and almost all of them are run out of people's homes, right? And so you have a real potential opportunity here, but you don't have that kind of opportunity if people don't have the ability to access, either for affordability reasons or because they don't exist or because they're constantly being broken by electricity surges, et cetera, the kinds of appliances that they need to create value of one kind or another. So how can we do a better job? How can we enhance the social value of energy in Sierra Leone? Well, the first thing we need to pay attention to is that we need to do targeted solutions for different groups, right? So if you come back to my original graph, right, there are different groups that have different challenges represented on this graph. And so one of the things that this kind of net social value of energy approach can do is help segment customer segments so that you can respond to the different needs of different customer segments, right? So in this group, as I mentioned earlier, along the vertical axis here, these are highly cost-burdened households. And the only way to functionally address the negative net social value of energy in those households is to substantially reduce their energy costs. Right? You have to provide electricity in a way that doesn't financially overburden them, because if they're financially overburdened, either they won't use the electricity, and we see lots and lots of examples of extremely low income communities who simply don't use electricity because it's too expensive. And of course, if you're not using it, then you can't get any value out of it. It's not going to have any economic or social impact or benefit, right? Or they can't afford it, but they pay for it anyways, in which case it's a massive financial drain on the household, and it undermines any economic or social gain that they might otherwise have had, right? And so the only solution for this group of households is to reduce electricity costs. By contrast, if you look at group D, which is here across the horizontal axis, almost all of them have a net positive affordability gap. They're not paying more than they can afford. In fact, they often feel they're paying less than they could afford, and they're willing to pay very high levels if you can deliver highly reliable electricity to them, right? And so here the solution is to create strategies that solve the electricity reliability problems for this category of households, right? And so you can go through the different groups of folks, and we've identified 5 different groups here in our plot, but of course it would be different for each community that you went into and measured these parameters or other relevant parameters for thinking about the net social value of energy, and provide different kinds of solutions for each one, right? So for this, as I said, we improve the affordability. For this group, we improve the reliability. For this group, we have to do both. We have to tackle both affordability and reliability simultaneously, et cetera, right? So the 4th strategy, right, is to strengthen existing pathways for value creation, right? So already we've measured in our sample that 25% of households generate primary or supplemental incomes through business activities that are co-located with their home premises using electricity-powered operations. And so in these contexts, you can do 2 things that can really enhance the social value of energy. On the one hand, you can increase the hours of available electricity, right, to these households. You can help new households find ways to take up home-based businesses that can generate income. And you can find ways to reduce generator use, right, to enable households to not have to run extremely expensive generators on extremely expensive fuel in order to power their home-based businesses. So what we often find in these contexts is that these households, once they start generating a reliable income stream from home-based, electricity-based businesses, then they fairly quickly shift to generators because the electricity service is unreliable in their area. And so if you can enhance that reliability, enhance the hours of electricity availability, they can reduce the generator use, which is much more expensive than the normal electricity service. And in that context, then they can make more money, right? And that contributes to the kind of social and economic benefit. But you have to think about the user of the electricity and the ways in which are they able to get the appliances that they need to run these businesses? Do they have the skill sets that they need to run these businesses? And can they get access to the electricity that they need to run these businesses when they need it, in a reliable fashion, and at what cost? So you have to think about all of the different contextual factors that go into the user as a business operator, not just what does my electricity service look like, right? What does my supply look like? Have I delivered electricity into that community is not good enough as an assessment. So next thing you can do is develop new pathways for value creation. This set of results came out of a survey that we did, looking at what kinds of new business opportunities, new appliances, et cetera, would people be interested in developing if they had access to new opportunities, new appliances, reliable electricity service, et cetera. And what we found is that people certainly across the spectrum of appliance owners, from the very basic set of appliances in some households all the way up to the most advanced households, we saw people aspirationally wanting more. They saw opportunities to go and develop new businesses with new equipment if they could get access to it, but they often, most often, were unable to get access to that equipment. So they couldn't afford it. There were no loans that were available to enable them to get access to that equipment. They couldn't get loans if they were available because of a lack of credit scores, right? They couldn't, there simply wasn't available in many of the communities that we interviewed folks in. There simply wasn't a place that you could go to buy reliable appliances of the kinds that we're talking about, right? Computers, power tools, screens and entertainment systems, et cetera, right? And so there was an aspiration, and there was a sense that there was opportunity in the market if you could take advantage of it, but almost no one could take advantage of it because they couldn't afford the appliances, they couldn't get the appliances, or they couldn't afford the electricity to run the appliances, right? So we saw the potential for substantial new economic activity among electricity users, but no way to get from where they were to that new place where they could take advantage of new technologies, new electricity supplies, et cetera, to grow economically. So finally, a lot of our focus was on appliances, because it turns out appliances are the things that convert electricity into value, right? Electricity is really useless by itself. Having an electricity supply does you nothing unless you've got appliances that can convert that electricity supply into value. You need a light bulb to create light. You need a razor to create a haircutting business. You need a refrigerator to cool drinks to sell in your local marketplace. Or to keep your own food from spoiling so that you can reduce your food expenses, right? So you need appliances to turn electricity into electricity services that are what really create value for you, whether that's social value in the household or economic value in the marketplace. But what we found is that, first, very limited set of appliances were available. Second, the appliances that were being imported into the country were the cheapest form that were easily damaged. And so with the unreliable voltage and frequency fluctuations, you often had appliances that were damaged that you then had to pay for repairs of those appliances. So that was an additional cost. So that the appliance purchase plus the repairs were actually more expensive than if you'd bought a high reliability appliance in the first place. But there was no credit access in order to buy that high reliability equipment, and the high reliability equipment wasn't being imported in the first place. So if you looked at the appliance sector in these communities, there was a big gap between what was actually available to people and their ability to afford and access those appliances on the one hand, and the appliance characteristics that would have delivered much greater value for households. So we found that there were lots of damaged appliances that were having to get repaired. There were lots of ways to improve customer satisfaction and sales around appliances that were not being applied in appliance stores. And there was very little opportunity available in the stores for any kind of financing or credit arrangement, including installment plans, right? So installment plans are where they pay ahead of time. And when they finally put enough money down, then they get the appliance, right? So financing is when you get the appliance and a loan and you have to pay it back over time, right? So installments are better for the credit people, but even there, because they're getting the money ahead of time before they have to give up the appliance, but even there, only half the stores were making that available, and mostly in the wealthier parts of town. So in the low income parts of town, there wasn't even an installment option, let alone any kind of opportunity for financing of new appliances, which could then turn into revenue, right? And where you could get the appliance and start creating the revenue before you had to start paying for this appliance. That simply didn't exist. So extremely poorly functioning electrical appliance markets. And as a result, nobody had the appliances to be able to create value. Not terribly surprising outcome, therefore, that there was very little economic and social impact from the provision of electricity, and the electricity was very costly, so it was creating a financial burden on households. And so we put all of this together in a kind of picture to describe what we call the energy poverty nexus, right? That energy insecurity and economic insecurity have an array of negative feedback relationships in these communities that fundamentally undermine the ability of households and businesses to get off the ground and to be able to grow socially and economically. So it's not surprising that when we looked at the outcomes, sorry, not us, but when these other studies have looked at the outcomes of bringing electricity into very low income communities, they find that there's relatively little impact in those spaces, because there are lots of ways in which insecurity on the energy side and insecurity on the economic side feed back on one another and create negative feedback relationships. And so the challenge is to flip that around, to find strategies, find ways of connecting. You see those here in the green, positive feedback loops whereby electrical supply, electrical appliance markets, and household capabilities and finances interact in positive feedback loops that generate positive net social value of energy. And in order to do that, we have to look at the demand side. We have to look very carefully at energy users and the opportunities and possibilities for people to use energy to create social value if we're going to make our investments in new electrical supply have the social and economic impact that we want. So thank you very much. It's been great to have an opportunity to chat with you. Again, Clark Miller, Director of the Center for Energy and Society at Arizona State University, and I look forward to hearing your feedback.